It's a very vibrant, very diverse, very pluralist media environment that we have here. I don't like the fact that there is increasing polarization, but the idea that views that are, say, hostile to, that are hostile to Donald Trump are somehow not represented, or hostile to conservatism are not represented, is just far, far from the truth.
Well, but right now, let us return to Donald Trump and his legal bid to potentially prize $1 billion from the pockets of the BBC. Well, let's face it, you and me, the license fee payers. Let's get a view from his home city of New York with Gerard Baker, editor-at-large of the Wall Street Journal. Jerry, as I'm sure you are aware, this Trump legal threat is huge, making huge headlines in the UK. How's it playing on your side of the Atlantic?
Yeah, Steve, good to be with you. It's getting a lot of attention. I mean, it's a media story. The media, inevitably, with their tendency to navel gazing, are kind of wallowing in it to some extent. Trump has form in this field, as you well know. This is not the first media organization he's sued or tried to get money out of. My own organization, the Wall Street Journal, he's suing them. I mean, $1 billion, Steve, is peanuts compared. He's going for 10 billion from us. So, I pity the license fee payers, but think about the poor shareholders. Think for a moment about the poor shareholders of News Corp. He's going for 10 billion. So it is. No, it's kind of typical Trump behavior. It's a media story, so it's attracting a fair amount of attention.
As you rightly pointed out, when it came to his legal actions against ABC and CBS, both of those networks ended up shelling out significant amounts of money. But in this particular case, the $1 billion that he cited that he might, sue the BBC for, given what many legal experts say is pretty shaky ground that he's on. I mean, is it really performative rather than anything else?
Well, again, as you say, a couple of these cases have resulted in media organizations actually stumping up fairly significant amounts of cash, the ones you've talked about. So, Trump is always on the lookout to make a little bit of money, and also to exercise pressure on media organizations, particularly ones that he doesn't like, that he thinks are being unfair to him. So there is some substance to it. Again, I'm not a lawyer. I'm certainly not versed these days in English defamation law, but I guess this will be under US defamation law. The First Amendment is pretty powerful. It's pretty hard to win a case of that sort. Although it must be said, and while we can, bemoan the fact that Trump behaves like this, I mean, that edit is, Steve, you worked at the BBC for a long time. I worked at the BBC for a time. I worked on Panorama. That edit of his speech was pretty.
Indeed, the BBC, outrageous. Even the BBC, isn't trying to defend the edit anymore. Yeah. I mean, they have Samir Shah, the chairman of the board, has issued an apology for it. But what Trump clearly wants over the next couple of days is a very fulsome, grovelling apology directed specifically at him. Whether he's going to get it, we don't quite know yet. But I want to ask you a question about what impact you believe Trump's approach, some call it lawfare, his approach to taking on the mainstream, the legacy media in the US, what impact it's had on journalism in the United States. Is there a sense, do you think, in which some major networks and major media institutions in the United States have been, to a certain extent, cowed by Donald Trump?
I don't think they have. I think it's a legitimate question to ask. It's a legitimate concern. It's clearly what Donald Trump is trying to do. But look, Steve, a casual look at the news, the websites, the apps for the major news organizations, the New York Times, CNN, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, obviously, there's no evidence there at all that news organizations are pulling their punches, or look at the nightly news on the main news networks, or on the major networks, or on the news networks. There's absolutely there's story after story after story that is negative about Donald Trump, that's critical about Donald Trump. The Democrats lost those elections. The Republicans lost those elections last week massively, in large part because there's just been a steady stream of negative stories. I mean, actually not unfair stories for the most part, genuinely reasonable stories about, what a mess things have been in certain respects, particularly over the economy. So, again, I don't doubt that there are some people, especially senior executives in organizations, who are fearful of the prospect of, Trump being calling calling them out or suing them or trying to extort money from them. You just don't see any evidence, though, Steve, in any of the coverage of Trump that anybody is going soft on the guy. It's, if anything, it's it's as negative and critical as ever.
No, it's interesting you say that, because one of the arguments being used by a great a number of defenders of the BBC in the United Kingdom is that for goodness sake, we will only realise just how valuable the BBC is in terms of British culture, political culture in particular, if and when we lose it. And to see what it might look like, the media landscape, when we've lost it, look at the United States. You appear to be suggesting that if one were to assume that the United States was a sort of wasteland of billionaire-owned media enterprises which simply kowtow and cozy up to the powers that be, that would be wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it's not true. Look, I think the argument for any organization, BBC, is obviously should be well placed to do it, and given its charter and given the nature of its funding, it really should be doing it. The case for impartial news, for some at least striving to be impartial — it's very hard these days to be impartial about anything, but at least for the striving towards impartial news, it's a strong one. I don't dispute that. And by the way, we at the Wall Street Journal — I used to be the editor of the Wall Street Journal, which meant that I ran the news side. The news side of the Wall Street Journal really, really strives very hard to play things down the middle and to be impartial. I now work on the opinion side, which is a conservative opinion site. But so the case for impartiality is strong, and I think there's a case the BBC could do it. But I do think there are many things about the US media landscape that are disturbing. It is a highly partisan, always has been, but it is even more partisan.
It's becoming more so, isn't it? And one could argue it's becoming more dominated by unaccountable, vastly wealthy billionaires.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't think that's, if you look at those supposedly unaccountable, they're accountable to their shareholders in most cases. But then, if you look at the major news organizations, most of them are public companies. Again, as I say, they're accountable to the market. So I think there are things to be concerned about. I think there are things that are regrettable about the US media market. I think just, however, the picture that I sometimes see painted in the British media of it, as you described it, this wasteland of, kind of partisan garbage controlled by billionaire owners, I just don't recognize it. And it's a very vibrant, very diverse, very pluralist media environment that we have here. I don't like the fact that there is increasing polarization, but the idea that views that are, say, hostile to that are hostile to Donald Trump are somehow not represented, or hostile to conservatism are not represented, is just far, far from the truth.
Well, Gerard Baker, who is editor-at-large of the Wall Street Journal. Gerard, it's a real pleasure to have you on the Times at One. Thank you very much for your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you.